I'm going to stop. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Why Brands Choose Short-Term Retail. I'm here today. My name is Stephanie Kidder. I am the CMO at Storefront, and I'm here with Mark Rosenberg, who is the head of the retail and chair of the retail department at the University of South Carolina. And we are here to present the results of a study that was run recently about pop-up stores. Mark, would you like to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and the study that we've run?
Sure. I'm Mark Rosenbaum. I'm the professor and chair of the retailing department at the University of South Carolina. We worked with Storefront to develop the survey that really gives us an understanding as to why retailers are choosing pop-ups and why they're successful, and even why some people think they're questionable. So we present what I think is actually a very interesting and in-depth study regarding the benefits of pop-up retailing.
That's really great. So we're going to get to that right after this. I just wanted to introduce Storefront a little for those of you who don't know us. Storefront is an online retail marketplace. Basically, we have an online marketplace for finding short-term retail space, which is exactly what we're talking about. The subject of today's study is the pop-up store. The Storefront is really changing the retail is functioning, as is the pop-up store, as we'll see in the results of the study that's coming up. What we are doing right now is trying to make it accessible to all. It's very difficult when you're running a pop-up store, especially if you're doing it in different cities, of finding that short-term retail space. So on our platform, we put space owners and landlords in contact with brands or artists or corporations who are looking to do short-term events and retail. We offer a huge variety of spaces in many cities in the world, and we combine that online service with concierge service for the larger, more complicated and detailed pop-up stores that people are running today. We have over 10,000 spaces, and we've been working with over 100,000 brands since the creation of Storefront. And as you can see, we're available in many cities around the world, over 30 of them worldwide. The pop-up store is actually something that is being used by brands of all kinds, from many different industries, many different types of companies, from very small individual, even artists, e-commerce sites, all the way through to very large brands or international stars. So we've had the pleasure of working with a lot of these companies and launching their pop-up stores and finding just the right space for their events. You can find all of that on our website, thestorefront.com, and we'd love to hear more from you. So now, to get to what we really are here for, let's move on and let Mark present the results of the study that we ran over the last 3 months.
Thank you.
Mark, I'll let you take the hand. There you go. Great.
Thank you very much. And before we begin, I have to preface this by saying that I'm currently right now in Uzbekistan working with Tashkent State University and the government and trying to improve the economy. So I apologize if there's any internet issues. But in any case, let's get right into the results of the 2019 Temporary Storefront and Pop-Up Trends Survey results. So working with Storefront, we posted the survey link on multiple sites, and we had close to 545 respondents. And you could see that the majority of respondents, about half of the respondents, came from marketing, event, and experiential design agencies, as well as fashion retailers. So those two groups made up close to 50% of the respondents. We also had representation from health and beauty retail, footwear, and you could see the list. But again, this was basically marketing design agencies and fashion retailing. In terms of where the respondents came from, about 3/4 of the respondents came from the United States. We had about 6% from the United Kingdom. We had about 6% from France, and then you could see 3% from Canada. And the list of almost every country was represented with one or two responses. But we should keep in mind that about 3/4 of the respondents are from the USA, so this is going to be a USA perspective. In terms of whom is represented in the survey, we could see that about 46% of the respondents represent traditional brick and mortar companies. About 31% are online. And the other category was really all of the above or a combination of both. So we could really basically say that we had a nice mixture of true brick and mortar, online, and a combination of both. In terms of who answered the survey, we can see that we were represented by executive management as well as the marketing, advertising, and branding department. So this gives you an idea that this definitely had an executive perspective. Now, what's interesting is that of the 545 respondents, 290 respondents, or about 53%, said yes, that they had used a temporary storefront or pop-up, and 47% of the respondents said no. Now, I made the decision here to then just focus in on organizations that have used a temporary storefront. So the sample size now after this slide is going to be reduced to the 290 respondents who said yes to the question, has your organization ever made use of a temporary storefront or pop-up? What's interesting is that when I analyzed the companies that said no, the typical reasons were simply costs, they couldn't find the location, they didn't understand the need for the pop-up, and they were concerned about logistical challenges in the pop-up process. But first and foremost, most of the respondents that said no was really due to costs. All right, now we're going to focus in on the companies that said yes, they have operated pop-ups. So of that, about 27% of the respondents represent fashion retailing, 22% represent marketing, event, or experiential design agencies. And then you see we're represented by consumer product retailing, health and beauty, footwear, luxury goods, and so forth. I want to point out that in the other category, which comprised about 16% of the respondents, or 47 companies, most of these other categories represented art galleries or artwork. There were a lot of gift companies, some books, one or two companies specialized in children's books. There were some home stores, but I would say that the most common responses in the other category had to do with art. In terms of how many times your organization has used a temporary storefront in the last year, you can see that the majority, well, not the majority, but about 35% of the respondents have used a pop-up more than 3 times. About another third have used it 2 to 3 times, and 25% have used it once. So again, it's really interesting to see that the largest percentage of respondents had used a pop-up more than 3 times in the last year. Now, when we asked the question, why did your organization choose to make use of a temporary storefront or a pop-up? And we said, check all that apply. What's really interesting is that I thought at first it was going to be sales, but if we look at the responses, some of the key reasons why companies chose to open up a temporary storefront really had to do with much more marketing and promotional answers. So for example, 66% of respondents said to increase brand awareness, 63% said to create a connection with consumers, 45% to introduce a new product or brand. Next major answer was to stage an event for customers and partners. And then the 5th answer was to increase sales for a specific product or brand. So really what's emerging is that companies are using pop-ups for promotional purposes, whether it's to increase brand awareness and to create this connection with customers. We're going to see this again in the next slide. When we ask consumers their #1 reason why they chose to open up a pop-up. That the number one answer was to create a connection with my customers, to increase brand awareness, to introduce a new product, to stage an event, and then again, only 11% of respondents said to increase sales. So we're definitely seeing that pop-ups are a means to create connections with customers, very much a marketing program, a way to increase brand awareness and to get a brand out there, to create that buzz, to stage that event. When we asked respondents on a scale of 1 to 4, how successful was your pop-up with respect to your goals? 1 being not successful and 4 being very successful. We can see that about 40% said very successful, and about another 40% gave it a 3. So let's say successful. So what we're seeing is that about 80% of the respondents viewed their pop-up as being very successful or successful. So when I actually analyzed the answers of the small percentage of people who said it wasn't successful, the number one answer was this lack of traffic, lack of expertise. Companies admitted that they didn't have expertise. And they also said that they didn't engage in enough public relations. It was insufficient public relations. But again, finding that right pop-up location is critical, because the most common answer to failures was due to a lack of foot traffic. But overall, pop-ups are successful. These are not my words. These are words of customers. How to judge a successful pop-up. And I hate slides that say a lot of text, but I thought this one respondent really hit the nail with the head when he or she said the activation reached over 2.4 million digital impressions and drove over 10,000 visitors to a website. Now, if we go back and think about why are companies opening up pop-ups? To create that brand awareness, to create the connections. We're seeing social referrals. We're seeing consumers in the store enter the contest through the hashtag nearly 500 times. And social posts garnered more than 31,000 social engagements. With over 4,000 visitors to the activation site in just 3 days, it generated unprecedented consumer engagement metrics. I mean, this answer this really highlights the success of what a pop-up can do. In less verbose answers, we also had other respondents really said we created a buzz, something that had not been tried before to introduce our brand and products and services. Another respondent said it's the best way to exchange with customers and tell our brand story. I thought this one was interesting about, oh, I'm sorry, I want to go back to the previous slide. A respondent said that customers appreciate something new, but I really like this saying. They wanted to meet the maker. And I think that when customers are exposed to online brands, they do want to meet the maker of these online brands and have some type of tactile experience. Also, I think it was interesting that consumers want to engage in conversation in a casual hangout atmosphere. It helps to build long-term trust for our brand. And then another respondent said, the pop-up allowed our customers to have a tactile experience. So it's not that brick and mortar is dead. In fact, the pop-up is a great opportunity to give that customers a tactile experience, to make a brand real, to create that engagement. If we look at how customers rank the importance of a site, I'm not going to repeat all the answers here, but you can see that foot traffic is essential to the success of a pop-up. And quite often, some of the respondents said that foot traffic in the mall was incredible, while on the extreme, I think we did note that the failures of a pop-up had to do with insufficient foot traffic. And again, I think this is a great slide to just study all the various reasons, but foot traffic, again, is critical. Exposure to the right type of customer is also critical. In terms of on average, what is your ideal length of time to rent a space for a temporary storefront or pop-up? The most popular options really were 3 to 90 days. You could see that if we look at the respondents, about 26% are renting them 1 to 2 days, but they go anywhere from 3 to 90 days is the most popular option. We don't see really anything longer than 90 days. Now, when we ask companies, did your organization experience these outcomes as a result of operating a temporary storefront or pop-up, and pick the top three. What's really interesting is that increased sales was actually number 2, even though that wasn't one of the key reasons for going into the pop-up. Companies did experience increased sales. The number 1 response, increased market visibility. Again, we see that it's a chance to give customers a tactile experience, to create that customer experience, to create social media engagement, and then drive website traffic. So again, it's that way to create the buzz. It's exactly what customers were saying. It's the buzz, it's the engagement, it's the let the customer see the maker of the brand. When we asked respondents, how does your organization promote its temporary storefront or pop-up stores? 89% of respondents mentioned social media. So perhaps companies that aren't successful with their pop-ups really don't have their social media strategy in place. Something to think about. 60% use online advertising on Facebook, Google Ads, and local websites. 53% use email or letters. 50% use websites. 46% use press media and public relations. Smaller amounts, 22%, use offline advertising. And the other respondents, really, they're at 6%, and there's almost nothing here. There's only 11 people who've used other. So really, what's the key lesson here? Social media, online advertising, email newsletters. Let your customers know where you are going to be in an area, and customers will be driven to go to the pop-up if they want a relationship with your brand. In terms of how many markets your organization has activated in the past year, you can see the results here. Majority 1 to 3. But again, if we looked at Stephanie's slide again, storefronts in major markets, so we're talking about major cities, exposure in major cities. And besides a real estate service, what other services does your organization use to implement its temporary storefront or pop-up? We can see the list: events, PR, design, furnishings, and staffing agencies. When we asked respondents if your pop-up store was successful, would you consider moving into a long-term lease? I want to highlight that the majority said no. So pop-ups definitely have a purpose to get your name out there, to create that buzz, on social media, to get to know customers, but not necessarily to turn that short-term lease into a long-term lease. And what's also interesting is that companies that operate pop-ups tend to have a very optimistic view of retail businesses in 2019. So many Americans talk about the retail apocalypse and the death of the mall. Yet companies who operate pop-ups, the 3 to 90 day pop-up, really have an optimistic perspective of the retail situation. So I think this is something that separates pop-up retailers from those other retailers who are watching their businesses decline in the physical realm. You know, some final words from respondents that really hit home better than any scientific study. And these phrases are from the respondents. A respondent said, "Retail's in a tricky phase right now. Brick and mortar is changing. social media is changing shopping practices, and big online stores like Amazon and Walmart are changing shopping patterns. We know that. And we also know that pop-ups can be successful. A customer said that the retail business is changing, and a pop-up or temporary store is the new way to sell. Another respondent said pop-ups offer a great marketing opportunity and push engagement on social media. And another respondent said people are always going to shop. The way they are is changing the way we do business. So overall, to put this into perspective, what I learned from the respondents, especially those that operated a pop-up in the past year, it's really a tool to create marketing buzz. It's a tool to connect with customers. And it's also a tool that yields increased sales. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you. I also want to mention, here's my email. If anybody's any questions, it's marosen@mailbox.sc.edu. Again, that's marosen@mailbox.sc.edu.
Thanks, Mark. That was really great. I found it really interesting, that last stat. We hear so many articles about the retail apocalypse and that retail is dying and maybe online is winning out. But those that have them so positive about retail, the outlook, the majority of them being positive about it, I think that's a very reassuring and refreshing thing, because we see a lot of energy and a lot of activity happening around pop-ups, and we hear that it's transforming basically retail. And do you think that's something that will continue to grow? And from your experience, and is it coming really from the customers, do you think, or is it just coming more from people who are seeing that there's these changes in retail and they're just looking for different ways to make it change?
I think that the pop-up is an exciting format. It gives customers the tangible experience for a short time, and then they could go back to their online world. I was amazed at how optimistic these respondents were. And again, that last slide was filtered by companies that operate pop-ups. They definitely see the world in a different light than I believe other companies. There's not a retail apocalypse here.
Mm-hmm.
It's retail excitement.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it is it the consumer who's changing, or is it more? I mean, I guess we all are changing with technology and with social media, but I think it's something that we're seeing even in sectors who are not targeting maybe younger generations. I think we're also seeing it with brands that are old, established brands. Do you think it's something that's pretty universal?
That's hard to tell, but what's interesting is that consumers seem to be delighted by this temporary ability to do business in a physical realm, and then move to maybe to a virtual realm, and then come back again to a physical realm. I think customers are looking to maintain long-term relationships in an online environment, or through email, through newsletters, exactly what the findings showed. And they don't need to maintain that relationship in a physical realm.
Great. We've got some questions here from the audience. So the first one, actually, it looks like we've kind of answered already. Hire, what advice would you give to a new company just starting out in retail?
That's a good question, because you almost need a two-pronged strategy. You need to connect with customers in a virtual manner, because the physical realm is actually, in a pop-up perspective, the physical realm may not be permanent anymore. So I think in the past, when one of my first books I read as a retailing major was Stanley Marcus, Who's Minding the Store. And I always think about Stanley Marcus and how Neiman Marcus was just a magical experience. And I often wonder what's happening to that magical experience. I think it's almost happening in an online environment, and the pop-up allows the magic to occur momentarily. I don't think customers need a long-term relationship in a physical realm with with retailers like they once had. So I think that retailers need multiple strategies. They need an online strategy, and they also need a physical strategy. And if they're not going to go with a long-term permanent lease, I think the pop-up is a great solution.
Hmm. So you really think that this is the future of retail, that if they don't, that they really need to go with this two-pronged strategy and this temporary strategy in order to succeed?
I would say so, especially if for brands that also are exposed online. The question is, do you really need to operate a full line store? You know, the full line department stores are closing, and in almost every city I'm watching malls close. I'm watching the flagship stores close and turn into condos or apartments. So I don't think we need the flagships anymore. I think the flagship department store is going to turn into the pop-up, and maybe that's my long-term vision. But where we used to have flagships, I think that pop-ups are going to be the new flagships. They're going to be
Yeah,
flagships that are temporary.
it gives people just the time to come in and discover. It keeps it fresh too.
Exactly. And yet, if you want to maintain that relationship, you then go online. You know, I'm going to I want to talk about the retailer Bonobos. I find Bonobos' strategy fascinating because the retailer operates full-line stores online, and its physical stores are actually simply sample locations. I mean, you can't really buy anything in a Bonobo store, but you could try it on. It gives
Hmm.
you that tactile experience, but then the company wants you to go online, and they minimize inventory loss, they minimize shipping. So I actually think that pop-ups are the new flagships.
That's great. I never thought of it that way. Let's see what the questions we have here. So we hear so much about digital native brands using pop-ups, about the opportunities for traditional brick and mortar with existing physical stores. I mean, it's not just online going to online brands that are going to do pop-ups. It's also, have you seen examples where there's actually brick and mortar brands that are also using the pop-up strategy?
Well, I know Macy's is actually testing pop-ups in several locations.
This is
And
true.
also college campuses are experimenting with pop-ups. So Target is actually doing pop-ups on college campuses in August as students move into campus and then dismantling them.
Okay. I haven't heard about that one. Being based in Paris, we don't hear so much about Target,
Okay,
but
yeah,
that's
so
interesting.
Target strategy is to do pop-ups on college campuses.
So there's lots of different ways they can do it then.
Exactly.
Um, so at the beginning, it looks like a lot of people are doing, so it's not just for sales, but it's also for marketing and for buzz. So would you say that this short-term retail should really be a part of any long-term marketing strategy, or this pop-up store should be the part of any long-term marketing strategy for consumer brands?
After I did the study, I will say yes.
Okay.
Prior to
It was a surprise, yeah.
prior to doing the study, I didn't realize as a retailing academic the extent to which pop-ups were being used to create buzz. But it makes sense if you look at the decline of print media, if you look at the decline of traditional television viewing,
Hmm.
decreased readership across most newspapers, with I think the exception of the Wall Street Journal. How else will companies create buzz? I think that pop-ups are actually playing a role now in the marketing of brands that maybe Vogue once did, or maybe print media once did. But as people no longer, they're shifting the way that they read. They're looking at Facebook, they're looking at social media, and pop-ups seem to be the marketing tool of the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that then it gets very complicated. I mean, it gets difficult, the promotion of it. So I know that when I was reading through some of the comments that you didn't include in the slides, and I did say one brand was that the difference between they had thought that opening the pop-up might bring in new customers, but what it actually did was bring in a lot of the customers that they were already working with. So in the end, it turned out to be more of a customer loyalty or a way to interact with their customers when their original intention was to try to find new customers with their pop-up store.
Right,
So it actually,
but
I think, is giving them surprises also.
even if you don't bring in new customers, I want to go back to that comment, because several respondents said it enabled my customers to meet the maker, to give customers the tactile experience. So perhaps those customers will actually become more loyal after they see the pop-up and they interact with the pop-up, because they're able to see the brand in a different manner. It's not just an online brand, but they're able to see the brand. You know, I'll give you an example. For years, I was a Frank and Oak customer online, and when I went to Toronto, the first thing I wanted to do was go to a Frank and Oak store to get a shave. I wanted to have that tactile relationship. And it does give the brand more meaning when customers can interact in different ways. So even if a pop-up was to cater to current customers, I suspect that the current customers would be even more loyal after they experience the pop-up.
Yeah, and also I think customers will talk about it, and word of mouth is so important
Exactly.
that actually creating that extra connection would actually probably increase the word of mouth that you might get from these customers as they get more loyal.
Exactly. And you know, even though I do want to point out that the results show that companies that opened up a pop-up, while the initial reason was not necessarily to increase sales, one of the key benefits of opening the pop-up was increased sales. So it is kind of interesting that marketing buzz is one of the key reasons to open up the pop-up, but then what companies realize is, successful companies realize, not only increased buzz, but they do realize increased sales.
That's true. That's true. We do see customers when they're testing new markets also to see if there is a potential in a new market for them. We see that with a lot of the cross-border pop-ups that we're seeing, brands that are starting in one country and then testing across the major cities in different countries, just to see if their brand has traction or can have traction in those different markets.
And it's a way to lower risk for global expansion.
True, definitely. All right. Well, I think that was the end of those questions. If there's anything you want to add, I really have enjoyed working on this study with you. I found the results to be very interesting. We've learned a lot from that. We will be sending out the presentation to anyone who requested to receive it during the survey process. If at this point, if you did not leave your email address at that time, but you would really like to receive the survey results or the slides from this presentation, just to send me an email at the address here, skitter@thestorefront.com. Attendees, of course, people who have signed up for the webinar will receive the slides tomorrow at any rate. So thank you very much. Mark, if there's anything you'd like to add, I really appreciate the work you've done on this for us. It's been very interesting.
And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to work with Storefront, and it's been a fascinating learning experience about how pop-ups are being used in the fashion industry as well as the consumer goods industries.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll hope to hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.